Welcome to True Voice Shorts, a curated audio series of stories and literary adaptations presented with care for language, voice, and listening in 30 minutes or less. Today's story is part of our Whispers of Forgotten Women series, where hidden voices from history rise again. Authors whose words once struggled to find their place, yet still echo with power today. A series devoted to voices history didn't preserve, women whose lives were shaped, limited, or erased by forces beyond their control. Kate Chopin, 1850 to 1904. She lived and wrote during a period of profound social upheaval in the United States. Born in St. Louis before the Civil War, she came of age as the nation was reshaping itself through Reconstruction, the end of slavery, and rigid efforts to restore social order in the South. After marrying and moving to Louisiana, Chopin was immersed in Creole and Cajun culture, where questions of race, inheritance, class, and gender were governed by strict, often unspoken codes. Women's roles were narrowly defined, and racial identity carried legal, social, and moral consequences. Writing at a time when women were expected to uphold moral norms rather than question them, Chopin instead explored interior lives, suppressed truths, and the quiet cost of obedience. Her work was often misunderstood or dismissed in her lifetime, yet it now stands as an unflinching record of how private lives were shaped and sometimes destroyed by the social rules of her era. Some women are erased not by scandal or rebellion, but by certainty, by the quiet, unquestioned authority of those who believe they already know the truth. In Désirée's Baby, a woman's entire life is undone by an assumption she's never allowed to answer. Désirée enters the world without a name and is granted one through marriage, and loses it again when fear and pride outweigh love. Her identity is defined around her, spoken about, decided on, judged, but never claimed by her own voice. Kate Chopin exposes a society where a woman's worth is conditional, dependent on lineage, appearance, and male approval. Désirée is cherished when she conforms to those expectations and discarded the moment she threatens them. No trial is offered, no proof is required. Patriarchal certainty is enough. Désirée's Baby. As the day was pleasant, Madame Valmondé drove over to Le Brie to see Désirée and the baby. It made her laugh to think of Désirée with a child. It seemed only yesterday that Désirée herself had been little more than a baby, when Monsieur Valmondé, riding through the gateway, had found her asleep in the shadow of the great stone pillar. The child had awakened in his arms and cried out, "Dada." That was all she could say. Some believed she had wandered there on her own, for she was just old enough to toddle. Others thought she'd been deliberately left behind by a party of Texans whose canvas-covered wagon had crossed the ferry below the plantation that late afternoon. In time, Madame Valmondé set aside all speculation. She believed only that Désirée had been sent to her by a kindly providence, a child to love, since she herself had no child of her own. And Désirée grew to be beautiful and gentle, affectionate and sincere, the pride of Valmont. It was no wonder that when Désirée stood one day against the same stone pillar in whose shadow she had lain asleep 18 years before, Armand Aubigny, riding by and seeing her, fell in love with her. That was the way of all Aubignys. They fell in love as if struck by a pistol shot. The wonder was that he had not loved her before, for he had known her since his father brought him home from Paris, a boy of 8, after his mother had died there. The passion that awoke in him that day swept along like an avalanche, like a prairie fire, like anything that drives headlong over every obstacle. Monsieur Valmont grew practical and wished things well considered. That meant the girl's obscure origin. Armand looked into Désirée's eyes and did not care. He was reminded that she was nameless. What did a name matter when he could give her one of the oldest and proudest in Louisiana? He ordered the corbeille, a bridal basket filled with gifts, lingerie, and all the finest finery from Paris for his beloved, and could scarcely restrain himself with what patience he could until it arrived, and then they were married. Madame Valmont had not seen Désirée and the baby for 4 weeks. When she reached L'Abri, she shuddered at the first sight of it, as she always did. It was a sad-looking place, long without the gentle presence of a mistress. Old Monsieur Aubigny had married and buried his wife in France, and she had loved her land too well to ever leave it. The roof came down steep and black like a cowl, extending beyond the wide galleries that encircled the yellow stuccoed house. Great solemn oaks stood close by, their thick, far-reaching branches shadowing it like a pall. Young Aubigny's rule was a strict one. Under it, the enslaved people had forgotten how to be light-hearted, as they had been during the old master's easy-going, indulgent lifetime. The young mother was recovering slowly. She lay stretched upon a couch in soft white muslins and lace. The baby slept beside her, resting on her arm at her breast. A nurse sat near the window, fanning herself. Madame Valmont bent over Désirée and kissed her, holding her close for a moment. Then she turned to the child. "This is not the baby," she exclaimed, startled. French was the language spoken at Valmont in those days. "I knew you would be astonished," Désirée laughed. "Look how he has grown, the little cochon de lait. Look at his legs, Mama, and his hands, his fingernails, real fingernails. Zandrine had to cut them this morning. Isn't it true, Zandrine?" The woman bowed her turbaned head gravely. "Merci, madame." "And the way he cries," Désirée went on, "is deafening. Armand heard him the other day as far away as Le Bonc's cabin." Madame Valmont never took her eyes from the child. She lifted him and carried him towards the brightest window. She studied the baby closely, then glanced just as searchingly at Zandrine, whose face was turned towards the fields. "Yes," Madame Valmont said slowly, returning the child to its mother. "He has grown. He has changed. What does Armand say?" Désirée's face glowed with happiness. "Ah, Armand is the proudest father in the parish, chiefly because it's a boy to bear his name, though he says he would have loved a girl just as well. But I know he says that to please me. And Mama," she added, drawing Madame Valmont close and whispering, "he hasn't punished a single one of them, not one since the baby was born. Even Négrillon, who pretended he burned his leg just so he could rest. Armand only laughed and said he was a scamp. Oh, Mama, I'm so happy. It frightens me." What Désirée said was true. Marriage and later the birth of his son had greatly softened Armand Aubigny's imperious nature. This was what made the gentle Désirée so happy, for she loved him desperately. When he frowned, she trembled and still loved him. When he smiled, she asked no greater blessing of God. But since the day he fell in love with her, Armand's dark, handsome face had seldom seemed clouded by a frown. When the baby was about 3 months old, Désirée awoke one day with the feeling that something in the air threatened her peace. At first, it was too subtle to grasp, only a vague uneasiness. Then came whispers amongst the enslaved people. Unexpected visits from distant neighbors who could not explain their reasons for coming. And finally, a strange, terrible change in her husband's manner, one she dared not ask him to explain. When he spoke to her, he looked away. and the old love light was gone from his eyes. He stayed away from home, and when he was there, avoided both her and the child without explanation. In his dealings with the enslaved people, a cruel spirit seemed suddenly to take hold of him. Désirée was miserable enough to die. She sat in her room one hot afternoon, wearing her peignoir, absently drawing her fingers through the long, silky brown hair that fell over her shoulders. The baby lay asleep on the great mahogany bed beside her, half uncovered, resting like a little monarch beneath its satin-lined half canopy. One of Leblanc's young boys stood nearby, fanning the child slowly with a fan of peacock feathers. Désirée's eyes rested on her baby as she struggled to understand the dark unease closing in around her. She looked from the child to the boy, and then back again, over and over. Oh! The cry escaped her without her knowing she had uttered it. The blood seemed to turn cold in her veins, and a dampness gathered on her face. She tried to speak to the boy, but no sound came at first. When he heard his name, he looked up and saw his mistress pointing towards the door. He set the fan aside and slipped quietly away across the polished floor. Désirée remained motionless, her gaze fixed on her child, her face stricken with fear. After a moment, her husband entered the room. Without looking at her, he went to the table and began searching through papers scattered there. "Armand," she called in a voice that might have pierced him if he had been capable of feeling it. He did not answer. "Armand," she said again. She rose and staggered towards him. "Armand," she gasped, clutching his arm. "Look at our child. What does it mean? Tell me." He gently but firmly freed his arm from her grasp. "Tell me what it means," she cried desperately. "It means," he said lightly, "that the child is not white. It means that you are not white." Understanding all that accusation implied gave her the strength to deny it. "It's a lie! It is a lie! It is not true! I am white," she said. "Look at my hair. It is brown. My eyes are gray. You know they are gray. And my skin is fair." She seized his wrist. "Look at my hand. Whiter than yours, Armand." She laughed wildly in near hysteria. "As white as Leblanc's," he replied cruelly, and turning away, leaving her alone with their child. As soon as she could hold a pen, Désirée wrote to Madame Valmont. "My mother, they say I am not white. Armand says I am not white. For God's sake, tell them it is not true. You must know it is not true. I shall die. I must die. I cannot live so unhappy." The answer came quickly and was brief. "My own Désirée, come home to Valmont. Come back to your mother who loves you. Come with your child." When the letter arrived, Désirée carried it to her husband's study and laid it open on the desk before him. She stood like a statue, silent, pale, unmoving. He read the letter without speaking. "Shall I go, Armand?" she asked, her voice sharp with pain. "Yes, go." Do you want me to go?" "Yes, I want you to go." He believed God had treated him cruelly, and in striking his wife so deeply, he felt as though he were repaying that cruelty. He no longer loved her because of the unknowing harm she had brought upon his name and his house. She turned away as if stunned, walking slowly toward the door, hoping he would call her back. "Goodbye, Armand," she murmured. He did not answer. That was his final blow. Desiree went in search of her child. Zandrine was pacing in the darkened gallery with him. Desiree took the baby from her arms without a word, descended the steps, and walked away beneath the live oaks. It was an October afternoon. The sun was sinking low. In the quiet fields, the enslaved people were picking cotton. She had not changed her thin white gown or slippers. Her hair was uncovered, and the sunlight caught a golden gleam in its brown strands. She did not take the wide road that led towards Valmonde. Instead, she crossed a deserted field where the stubble bruised her delicate feet and tore at her dress. She vanished amongst the reeds and willows along the edge of the deep, sluggish bayou and did not return. Several weeks later, a strange scene unfolded at Le Brie. In the center of the swept-back yard, a great bonfire burned. Armand Aubigny sat in the wide hallway that overlooked it and handing objects to the workers who fed the flames. A small willow cradle with all its delicate trimming was placed on the fire, already burning with the costly layette. Then came silk gowns, velvet and satin, lace and embroidery, bonnets and gloves. The corbeille had been the finest quality. Last of all, he threw in a small bundle of letters, Desiree's innocent notes from their courtship. One letter remained behind in the drawer. It was not hers, but part of an old letter written by his mother to his father. After a while, he took it out and read it. She thanked God for her husband's love and wrote, "But above all, night and day, I thank the good Lord for arranging our lives so that our dear Armand will never know that his mother, who adores him, belongs to the race marked by the brand of slavery." When Kate Chopin wrote Desiree's Baby, she was no longer writing from the hopeful distance of youth. She was a widowed woman in her 40s, shaped by loss, responsibility, and an intimate knowledge of Southern society. Chopin stood inside the culture she examined, a white woman raised among traditions of lineage, heritage, and inherited certainty. She watched with measuring clarity as those traditions justified cruelty and moved forward smoothly without ever stopping to question themselves. Desiree's Baby tells one such story from the inside, a quiet domestic tragedy shaped not by malice alone, but by unquestioned inheritance and social obedience. The story ends in a single devastating revelation, but Chopin didn't stop there. The reflection that follows is not an explanation of the story, it is its echo. A voice standing just off the road, watching the procession pass, and asking what gets lost when no one dares to step out of line. Reflection. Some people are born with a vital, responsive energy. It allows them to keep pace with their time and even to help drive it forward. They move easily with the current. They do not need to question meaning or pause for understanding. They do not grow weary or lose step or fall out of line to be left behind watching the procession pass. Ah, that moving procession. That has left me by the roadside. Its colors seem brighter than sunlight on rippling water. What does it matter if souls fall beneath the relentless feet of the crowd? It moves with the majestic rhythm of the spheres. Its discord rises into a single, sweeping harmony, blending with the music of other worlds, completing God's vast orchestra. That procession of human energy is greater than the stars, greater than the living earth and all that grows upon it. And yet I could weep at being left behind, left with the grass, the clouds, and a few quiet animals. Still, I feel at home amongst these symbols of what does not change. In the procession, I would feel only crushing feet, clashing noise, ruthless hands, and stifling breath. I would not hear the rhythm of the march. So greetings, silent hearts. Let us remain still and wait here by the roadside. Kate Chopin does not tell us what became of Désirée. Her story ends where certainty ends, at the edge of the bayou, where a woman and her child pass without record. We are left to imagine her life not in events, but in conditions, in the weight of exile, in the necessity of survival, in the quiet courage of continuing when a name, a home, and a history have been taken away. Désirée's fate is not written because, for women like her, it rarely was. What we do know comes later, and too late. The judgment that destroyed her was never hers to hear. It belonged to the very system that claimed authority over her life. When the truth finally surfaces, it offers no comfort, only the knowledge of what has already been lost. These are not questions confined to the past. We live among assumptions passed as fact, among voices diminished before they are heard, among lives shaped by decisions made without listening. Désirée's baby asks us to notice how easily certainty replaces compassion and how often truth arrives only after the damage is done. To listen to this story now is not to resolve it, but to remember, to hold space for a woman whose voice was never recorded, and to consider whose voice we may still be failing to hear. Epilogue. Kate Chopin returned again and again to women at the edge of certainty, women who paused, questioned, or felt something shift beneath the surface of ordinary life. In the stories, like The Story of an Hour and A Pair of Silk Stockings, she explored moments so brief they might seem inconsequential, yet powerful enough to alter how a woman understands herself. In The Storm and Athanase, she wrote openly, sometimes daringly, about desire, marriage, and the quiet resistance of women whose inner lives could not be contained by social rules. In The Awakening, her most famous work, she followed that questioning to its further, most unsettling conclusion. What connects these stories is not rebellion for its own sake, but attention. Chopin watched closely. She listened to what women thought but did not say, to what they endured without protest, to what they lost when the world refused to make room for their truths. Many of these works were misunderstood or dismissed in her lifetime. Some were not published until after her death. Yet taken together, they form a body of work that feels modern, not because it argues, but because it observes. Désirée's baby is one voice in that larger conversation, not the loudest, perhaps not even the most explicit, but one that lingers, asking us to notice how easily a life can be undone and how quietly that undoing can disappear from view. Kate Chopin often returned to this quiet space, the moment when a woman understands something about herself that cannot be explained away. Sometimes that understanding arrives through loss, sometimes through silence, sometimes through the sudden absence of what once defined a life. In another of Chopin's most enduring works, the moments unfold within the span of a single hour. A woman alone with her thoughts begins to feel something unexpected, something fragile, unnamed, and deeply personal. It is not spoken aloud, it does not last long, but for a brief moment, it exists fully. That story, like this one, does not argue or instruct. It simply notices what happens when a woman is left alone with her own awareness and how quickly the world moves to reclaim her. The next story is smaller in scale, but no less revealing. The Story of an Hour. Knowing that Mrs. Mallard was affected with heart trouble, great care was taken to break the news of her husband's death to her as gently as possible. It was her sister Josephine who told her, in broken sentences and careful hints that revealed truth only in fragments. Her husband's friend Richard was there too, having been among the first to learn of the disaster through a newspaper report, and eager to confirm it before the story was spread further. She did not hear the news as many women would have. She did not collapse or stand in stunned disbelief. Instead, she wept at once with sudden, wild abandon in her sister's arms. When the storm of grief had spent itself, she went away to her room, alone. She would have no one follow her. There stood, facing the open window, a comfortable armchair. Into this she sank, pressed down by physical exhaustion and emotional weight. She was young, with a fair, calm face whose lines spoke of repression rather than strength. Yet there was a subtle look in her eyes, a brightness that suggested intelligence and awareness. Now her gaze drifted outward, following the shapes of the world beyond the windows. The tops of trees trembled with new spring life. The air was rich with rain. From the street below came the sound of a peddler calling his wares. Somewhere nearby, a song drifted faintly through the air. Countless sparrows fluttered in the eaves, and far off patches of blue sky appeared between the clouds that still gathered on the western horizon. She sat quietly, waiting, without knowing what she was waiting for. Something approached her slowly, something she resisted with dull, unthinking fear. At first, she could not name it. It was too subtle, too unfamiliar. But it pressed upon her consciousness all the same. When she finally recognized it, her lips parted and whispered the word over and over under her breath. Free. 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 The vacant stare faded from her eyes. They grew sharp and bright again. Her pulse quickened, a tremor passed through her body. She felt warm and alive. She did not stop to ask whether this scene of freedom was right or wrong. She knew only that it existed and that it was hers. There would be no powerful will bending hers in blind persistence. No one to live for her or demand her days. Her body and her soul belonged to herself. Tomorrow and all the days to come would be her own. She thought of how, when she had once loved him, sometimes, often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, unsolved mystery that it was, count for besides the possession of self? There would be no one to impose their will upon her, and she opened and spread her arms out to the years that lay ahead. Free, body and soul, free, she whispered. Josephine knelt outside the closed door, her lips pressed to the keyhole. Louise, she begged softly, open the door. You will make yourself ill. I am not making myself ill, she replied quietly. I am getting stronger. She rose at last and opened the door. Her sister's face was wet with tears, but Mrs. Mallard's eyes were bright and calm. Together they descended the stairs. Richard was waiting below. Someone was opening the front door with a latch key. It was Bentley Mallard who entered. Alive, unharmed, unaware of the report of his death. He had been far from the scene of the accident, and no hint of tragedy had touched him. Josephine cried out. Richard moved quickly to shield Mrs. Mallard from the sight, but it was too late. Mrs. Mallard collapsed and died almost immediately. Doctors later said that she died of heart disease, of joy that kills.